The lunch rush at Orem was chaos wrapped in elegance. Crystal chandeliers glittered above tables where New York's elite sipped champagne worth more than a waitress's monthly rent. And in the far corner, near the swinging kitchen doors, 26-year-old Mara Collins sat on an overturned crate with a dented lunchbox balanced on her knees. She wasn't supposed to eat there, not during service hours, but it was her only break, and skipping a meal meant dizzy spells, something she couldn't afford when tips paid the rent. She opened the box carefully, as if afraid to disturb the tiny patch of warmth inside her world. Steam rose from a small container of homemade vegetable stew, thick, brown, and humble, the kind her mother made every Sunday night when the pantry was nearly empty. Mara closed her eyes, whispering, just like Mum used to. At that moment, the restaurant doors opened, and conversation shifted like a tide. Richard Langford had arrived. He was the kind of man who didn't just enter a room, he colonized it. Every head turned. The maitre d' nearly tripped trying to take his coat. Cameras sometimes followed him, but today he came without entourage, only an air of quiet dominance. He moved through the restaurant like a blade, sharp and cold, nodding curtly to his dinner companions, already waiting at the VIP table. They were investors from Tokyo, men who judged worth by watch brands and confidence. As Richard passed the kitchen entrance, something foreign caught his attention. A smell. He frowned, nostrils flaring. "What is that?" A young waiter froze. "Sir?" "That smell. Like cheap stew." The waiter followed his gaze toward the kitchen, where Mara sat frozen, spoon halfway to her mouth. Her eyes went wide. The maitre d' rushed forward. "Apologies, Mr. Langford. Staff aren't permitted to eat near—" Richard raised a hand, silencing him. His voice was smooth, almost amused. "Let her finish. I'm curious what poverty tastes like." A ripple of laughter spread among the investors. Mara's hand trembled. She tried to put the lid back on the container, but her fingers fumbled. The stew sloshed onto the floor, staining her apron. Her face burned crimson. One of the men chuckled. "Maybe she's feeding the rats." Richard leaned slightly closer, his eyes like polished steel. "Next time, sweetheart, try a real meal. Something that doesn't smell like desperation." Her throat tightened. Every instinct screamed to stay quiet, to survive. But something inside her snapped. She lifted her chin and said softly, "It may not look like much, sir, but this food comes from love. Something money can't buy." The room went silent. Even the investors stopped smiling. Richard's expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened for a split second. Then he smirked. "Love, huh? I'll take caviar over sentiment any day." He turned away, dismissing her completely. Mara swallowed the lump in her throat and knelt to clean the spill. No one helped her. No one even looked her in the eye. As she scraped the last bit of stew into the trash, she whispered to herself, "One day, they'll choke on their own pride." But what she didn't know, what no one in that glittering room could have guessed, was that this exact stew, the one he mocked, would soon bring the mighty Richard Langford to his knees, because one bite of it would make his entire past come rushing back and turn his face white. Mara Collins lived in a world built on exhaustion. Every morning started the same way, with the groan of the old radiator in her tiny Queen's apartment, and the faint hum of the city that never cared she existed. The walls were thin, the pipes clanged, and the smell of fried food from the deli downstairs never quite left her clothes. By 6 a.m., she was already on her feet, tying her hair back with the same worn elastic she'd used for 3 years. Her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror looked older than 26. Dark circles under her eyes, calloused hands, a smile she practiced for strangers, but never for herself. Her mother, Helen, slept in the next room, thin as a shadow under a pile of blankets. Chemotherapy had stolen her strength, her hair, and most of her memory of what happiness felt like. Mara moved quietly, not wanting to wake her, setting out her medicine bottles like tiny glass soldiers. she whispered. "Morning, Mum," kissing her forehead. Helen stirred, her voice a fragile whisper. "Work again, baby?" "Yeah, double shift today," Mara said softly. "I'll bring you soup tonight." Her mother smiled faintly. "As long as it's ours." Ours meant one thing, the old recipe that had kept them alive through every hard year. The vegetable stew, potatoes, carrots, and just enough leftover meat scraps to fool the stomach. Helen used to call it harvest stew, the kind of food that fed the soul, not the wallet. It was poor people's comfort, but to them it was sacred. Before the cancer, Helen had been a chef. Not just any chef. She once worked for the Langford family in their private estate kitchen decades ago. But something had happened. A scandal, a fine-running, whispers of betrayal. She never told Mara the details, only that she walked away from a world that didn't deserve her cooking. Mara never pressed her. She'd learned early that pain hides best behind silence. After her mother's diagnosis, Mara dropped out of community college to work full-time. She bounced between jobs, diner waitress, hotel cleaner, and finally, server at Aurum, a restaurant so high-end it felt like serving gods. Every shift came with rules. Never make eye contact with elite guests, never speak unless spoken to, never forget your place. Her co-workers joked about rich people's absurdity, but Mara didn't laugh. She didn't have the luxury. She was too busy counting the minutes between paychecks, wondering how many more pills her mother could skip before the next hospital bill was due. One night, when she thought her mother was asleep, Mara found her sitting on the couch clutching an old photograph. It showed a young Helen, standing beside a man in a suit. His hand rested gently on her shoulder. The photo was creased, edges worn. The name scrawled on the back made Mara pause. Richard L. "Who's that?" she asked. Helen's eyes filled with tears. Someone who promised forever, then disappeared. Mara didn't understand then. She thought her mother meant a lost love, not a secret buried beneath decades of silence. That morning, before heading to Aurum, Mara packed her lunch carefully. The stew still warm, the smell comforting. It wasn't fancy, but it reminded her she still had a piece of her mother's strength. She never imagined that one meal, made from scraps, love, and memory, would ignite a chain of events powerful enough to shatter the wall between the poor waitress and the billionaire who once held her mother's heart. And soon, the smell of that humble stew would bring ghosts back to life. Aurum wasn't just a restaurant. It was a monument to excess, the kind of place where gold leaf wasn't garnish, it was expectation. The lobby smelled faintly of truffle oil and old money. Walls of tinted glass kept the noise of the city out and the illusion of perfection in. Every night, the lights dimmed to a warm amber glow, designed to make every diner feel a little richer, a little more important. Soft jazz hummed from hidden speakers, while waiters glided between tables like ghosts, their smiles rehearsed and their posture military straight. Mara had been working there for 6 months, long enough to know that one wrong move, one dropped fork, one smudged glass, could get her fired. The place wasn't forgiving. It didn't have to be. There was always another desperate soul ready to wear the black and white uniform. She adjusted her collar in the mirror behind the service station, tucking in a loose strand of hair. Her reflection looked nervous, but practiced. "Just make it through tonight," she whispered. The dinner rush was minutes away when the maitre d', Lucas, called out, "Langford party arriving! Everyone on alert!" The room seemed to inhale collectively. Richard Langford wasn't a regular. He was an event. The man's net worth could buy the entire block, and everyone knew he didn't tolerate mistakes. Rumor said he'd once fired a hotel staffer because his champagne glass had condensation on it. The doors opened, and Richard entered, flanked by 2 investors from Tokyo and his personal assistant. His presence shifted the air pressure in the room. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the pianist stumbled for half a beat before recovering. "Good evening, Mr. Langford," Lucas greeted with a bow. "Your usual table is ready." Richard didn't respond. He didn't need to. He gave a curt nod and walked toward the corner table overlooking Central Park. Table 12, the Throne of Aurum. Mara was assigned to his section that night. Her stomach sank. She'd been praying to avoid him after the lunchtime humiliation. The memory of his smirk, the laughter, it still burned in her chest. Lucas handed her the order pad and whispered, "Don't screw this up, Collins. Smile, be invisible, and pray he tips." She forced a nod. "Got it." When she approached the table, Richard was already scrolling through his phone. He didn't look up when she spoke. "Good evening, sir. Can I start you with something to drink?" He muttered, "McAllen, neat." "Yes, sir." She hurried to the bar, trying not to shake. Behind her, the investors chatted softly in Japanese. She caught a few words. Disciplined, cold, efficient. All meant to flatter the man who didn't care for anyone's approval but his own. As she set the drink in front of him, one of the investors smiled politely. "You look nervous, miss." She blinked, forcing a polite grin. "Just trying to make sure everything's perfect." Richard finally looked up. "Then don't talk. Just serve." Her breath caught. "Yes, sir." The tension hung thick, but business resumed. The men discussed market expansions, acquisitions, mergers. All the things people like Mara would never touch, except to refill their glasses. Yet, amid the clinking of silverware and the low hum of moneyed conversation, a faint smell drifted through the kitchen door. The smell of Mara's leftover stew, still reheating in the staff microwave. It reached Richard's table like an uninvited memory. He paused mid-sentence, nose twitching. One of the investors wrinkled his nose. "What is that?" Richard's voice went low, distant. "Something I haven't smelled in 30 years. Mara froze where she stood, heart pounding. She knew that scent anywhere. It was hers. And before the night was over, that same smell would pull Richard Langford's past straight into the present. The smell of stew lingered like an unwelcome ghost. It didn't belong in a place like Aurum, where truffle foam and lobster bisque were the scent of status. It was earthy, real, human, and that made it offensive. From the corner of the kitchen, a voice snapped, "Who the hell microwaved something during service?" Mara froze. Every pair of eyes turned to her. The faint curl of steam still rose from the open staff microwave. Lucas, the maitre d', stormed in, his perfect hair trembling with fury. "You, Collins, what did I tell you about bringing food from home?" It's my lunch," she stammered. "I didn't think anyone—" "Didn't think," he hissed. "You brought that smell into this restaurant while Mr. Langford is dining here. Are you insane?" Before she could respond, a deep, cold voice cut through the chaos. "Is there a problem?" Richard Langford stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, eyes narrowed. Lucas immediately switched tone. "No, sir, just a minor staff issue. Staff. Won't happen again." But Richard's gaze was locked on Mara. "What's in the microwave?" Mara's throat went dry. "Just food I made for lunch." He walked closer, each step deliberate, and opened the microwave door. The smell grew stronger. Carrots, onions, a faint hint of rosemary. Beef stock. Richard stared into the container as if it held a ghost. Then his mouth twisted into a smirk. "This," he said, gesturing to the bowl, "is what poverty smells like." The investors had followed him in, curious. One laughed politely. "A home recipe?" Richard chuckled under his breath. Probably something her grandmother made during the Great Depression. Mara's hands trembled. "It's just food, sir," she said, softly. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. Food has taste. This has pity. The investors laughed again, and the sound burned in her ears. Every muscle in her body wanted to disappear, but something, some small ember of pride, kept her standing. "I wasn't offering it to you," she said, voice shaking but steady. "It's mine." The room went silent. The waitstaff exchanged nervous glances. Lucas paled. "Collins, apologize, now." But Mara didn't. She couldn't. Richard tilted his head, amused. You've got nerve. Tell me, does your mother cook the same way? She flinched. She taught me everything I know. Then she must be a remarkable woman, he said with a cruel smile, to make something this common. The words landed like a slap. Mara's breath hitched, her eyes glassy. Lucas stepped forward. Mr. Langford, I assure you, she'll be disciplined immediately. No need, Richard said. Humiliation is its own punishment. He turned, dismissing her entirely. The investors followed him out, their laughter echoing down the marble hall. Mara stood frozen, shame rising in her chest like soak. Her co-workers avoided her gaze. She felt the tears burning, but refused to let them fall. Lucas whispered harshly, Clean it up and get back to work. You're lucky he didn't have you fired. She nodded, numbly gathering the pieces of her ruined meal. The stew had spilled onto the counter, staining the pristine white towel beneath it. When the door swung shut behind them, she sank onto the floor, pressing her hand over her mouth to stop the sob from escaping. In the distance, Richard's laughter drifted faintly through the restaurant. But as it reached him, something shifted in his chest. A flicker of unease he couldn't explain. That smell still clung to him. Familiar. Haunting. And before the night ended, he'd realize exactly why. After the humiliation, Mara couldn't focus. Every sound in Aurum, the clink of crystal, the hiss of searing butter, felt like an insult. She finished her shift in silence, her movements mechanical. When the last plate was cleared and the dining room lights dimmed, she slipped into the back corridor, where no one could see her. Her lunchbox was still there on the counter, cold now. She stared at it for a long moment, fighting the ache in her throat. Lucas's voice echoed in her head. You're lucky he didn't fire you. Richard's laughter still rang louder. Food has pity. She clenched her fists, whispering, He doesn't get to take this from me too. Mara sat down on an overturned crate, opened the lid, and picked up the spoon. The stew had thickened, but its scent was still comforting. Her mother's kitchen, her childhood, safety. She took one slow bite. The flavor was everything her life wasn't. Warm, kind, patient. She closed her eyes, letting the memory of her mother's humming fill the air. At that exact moment, on the other side of the kitchen door, Richard Langford stopped mid-sentence. The investors were talking about market shares, but his attention was elsewhere. The smell hit him again, sharp, nostalgic, and piercing. He set down his wine glass, his face suddenly pale. His assistant noticed first. Sir, are you all right? He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the corridor, the same direction where the smell was coming from. Something inside him twisted painfully, a thread being pulled after decades of silence. He rose from his seat, ignoring the puzzled looks of his guests. Excuse me. Richard walked into the kitchen without asking permission. The staff froze. The clatter of pans stopped mid-air. He followed the scent until he saw her, Mara, sitting alone, a metal spoon halfway to her lips. For a split second, he wasn't in Aurum. He was 20 years younger, sitting in a small farmhouse kitchen, watching a woman with kind brown eyes stir a pot on the stove. Helen. He blinked hard, forcing the memory away, but his pulse was racing. Mara looked up, startled. Sir, what are you doing back here? He didn't respond right away. His gaze dropped to her lunchbox. What is that? Just stew, she said defensively. You already made fun of it once tonight. He stepped closer, his voice quieter, unsteady. What kind of stew? She frowned. Vegetable. My mom's recipe. Why? The room felt smaller. The sound of his heartbeat filled his ears. Does it have rosemary? Carrots? A dash of vinegar near the end? Mara blinked. Yeah. How do you know that? He reached for the counter to steady himself. Because someone once made that for me. A long time ago. Mara's brow furrowed. What are you talking about? Richard's jaw tightened. What's your mother's name? Helen. Helen Collins. The name struck like a blow. He staggered back, eyes wide. The color drained from his face. Mara stood, confused. Do you know her? He didn't answer. His breathing was ragged. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Sir, you need to sit down. Before she could move, he swayed, one hand clutching the counter, then collapsed onto the marble floor. Glass shattered. Shouts filled the kitchen. Mara dropped to her knees beside him. Somebody call an ambulance! Richard's eyes fluttered open for a moment. His lips moved, barely a whisper. Helen! Mara froze. What did you say? He didn't reply. His eyes rolled back, and everything went still. And in that single heartbeat, Mara's world and his past collided. One spoonful of stew had just unlocked a secret buried for decades. The beeping of hospital machines faded into something else. Wind through tall grass, laughter over a pot of simmering stew. In Richard Langford's mind, the world rewound 30 years. He was young again, standing on the porch of a modest farmhouse outside Albany. Back then, he wasn't a billionaire. He was a man with grease on his hands and dreams too big for his bank account. The Langford name meant nothing. His father's company had just collapsed, leaving him to claw his way through life with charm and ambition. That was the summer he met Helen Ward. She worked at a small roadside inn, cooking for travelers. Her food wasn't fancy, it was honest. He'd stopped there one stormy afternoon, soaked through, broke, and hungry. Helen had given him a bowl of stew and a smile that made the rain feel warmer. You look like someone who hasn't eaten in days, she'd said. He'd laughed. You're not wrong. She had wiped her hands on her apron and sat across from him, curious. So what's your story, city boy? Trying to build a life, he said. Something big. Helen smiled softly. Then you'll need something to keep you grounded. He didn't know it yet, but she would become exactly that. Weeks turned into months. He kept finding reasons to stop by the inn. Broken down car, business meetings nearby, excuses that fooled no one. She taught him how to cook, how to laugh without planning the next step. Her laugh was always accompanied by the smell of thyme and rosemary. One night, sitting by the stove, he said, You know, Helen, I could live off this stew forever. She grinned. It's not the stew, it's what's in it. He pretended to think. Love? Leftovers, she said, laughing. But yeah, love helps too. They fell in love the way people fall asleep. Slowly, then all at once. She believed in him when no one else did. When he finally landed a business deal that could change everything, she hugged him tight and whispered, Don't forget who you are. But money has a way of rewriting memories. When the Langford family fortune was suddenly restored through an inheritance, Richard was pulled back into the world he'd escaped. Corporate dinners, suits, power. The kind of world where someone like Helen didn't fit. He promised he'd come back for her. He didn't. A year later, he married Evelyn Grant, the daughter of his father's old business partner. It wasn't love, it was survival. Evelyn was beautiful, strategic, and cold. The merger of their names saved the Langford legacy. The marriage saved nothing else. He tried not to think about Helen, but every now and then he'd hear a song or smell rosemary, and she'd come rushing back. Then came the letter. Written in blue ink, it simply read, You don't know this yet, but you left more behind than you think. H. He never replied. He didn't have the courage. Years later he tried to find her, but it was like she'd vanished. Her old inn was gone, the phone disconnected. He told himself she'd moved on, started a family, maybe found someone who deserved her. But as the years passed, guilt turned to ache, and ache hardened into silence. Now, lying in a hospital bed, Richard blinked against the harsh light, Helen's name still on his lips. The nurse leaned over him. Sir, you collapsed at the restaurant. You're safe now. He didn't hear her. His mind was still in that old kitchen, watching Helen stir the pot. "Don't forget who you are," she whispered in memory. And for the first time in 30 years, Richard realized he already had. But fate wasn't finished with him yet. Somewhere out there, Helen's legacy was still alive and sitting right beside him. The next morning, St. Mary's Hospital smelled of antiseptic and regret. Richard Langford lay in a private room, hooked to a heart monitor that beeped in slow, steady rhythm. The doctor had called it exhaustion, stress, mild cardiac shock, words that didn't match the storm inside his chest. He stared at the ceiling, but all he could see was her face. Not Helen's. The waitress's. The one who looked at him with defiance and pain. The same eyes that once looked at him with love. There was something about her. Something he couldn't shake. When the nurse came in to check his vitals, Richard's voice was hoarse. "The young woman from the restaurant. The waitress. What's her name?" "I'm sorry, sir. We don't have that information." "Find it." His tone left no room for argument. Meanwhile, across town, Mara sat by her mother's bedside, the hospital bracelet still clinging to her wrist from the night before. Her hands trembled as she told the story. "He just collapsed, Mom, right in front of me. 1 minute he was fine, the next, gone pale as a ghost." Helen looked weak but alert, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did you say his name was Langford?" "Yeah. Richard Langford. You know, the billionaire. You've probably seen him on TV." Helen's face drained of color. "Richard?" Mara frowned. "Wait. You know him?" Her mother hesitated, her lips trembling. "No. I just remember the name from a long time ago." But her tone betrayed her. Mara had heard that softness before, whenever her mother spoke about the man she once loved and lost. At Orem, chaos reigned. The restaurant's owner had called a staff meeting after the news broke that their most powerful client had collapsed on site. Lucas paced back and forth, waving his hands dramatically. "Do you people realize what this means? The press is circling like vultures. If anyone talks, we're finished." Mara sat quietly in the back, still shaken. She could feel everyone's eyes on her. Some pitied her, others blamed her. After the meeting, she slipped out the back door for air. The city was waking up, honking taxis, barking dogs, the buzz of normal life. But nothing felt normal. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello." A woman's calm voice replied. "Miss Collins, this is Grace from the Langford Foundation. Mr. Langford has requested to see you." Mara's stomach dropped. "Me? Why?" "He said it's important." He asked personally. "I don't think that's a good idea," Mara said quickly. "Last time I saw him, he humiliated me." Grace paused. "I can only tell you he seemed shaken. He wants to talk." Mara hung up, staring at the cracked sidewalk beneath her feet. Her mind raced. Why would a billionaire care about a waitress now? Unless... She shook her head. No, he's not the type to feel guilty. But that night, as she reheated dinner for her mother, the thought wouldn't leave her. The way he'd said her mom's name before collapsing, the look on his face, like he'd seen a ghost. Across town, Richard sat in his hospital bed, flipping through an old leather notebook. Between the yellowed pages was a photo. Helen Ward, laughing under the summer sun, her hair tied with a red ribbon. He traced her face with his thumb, whispering, "You had a daughter, didn't you?" He looked up at the nurse. "Tell my driver to bring the file on Helen Ward, every record, every address." As the nurse nodded and left, he leaned back, the truth dawning like a slow sunrise. That waitress, Mara Collins, wasn't just familiar. She was the echo of everything he'd lost, and deep down, he already knew why. The afternoon sun bled through the blinds of Richard Langford's hospital room, striping the floor in bars of gold and shadow. He sat upright now, pale but composed, reading an old manila file his assistant had brought. The folder trembled slightly in his hands. On the cover, Helen Ward, Employment Records, Langford Estate, 1987. Every page was a ghost. Her handwriting, her signature, a recipe card written in fading ink. Harvest stew. Love feeds better than wealth. Richard whispered, "She kept it all these years," then corrected himself. Someone did. He pressed the intercom. "Grace, has the girl arrived?" "She's waiting downstairs, sir. Should I send her up?" His pulse kicked. "Yes." Meanwhile, Mara sat in the waiting area, twisting her hands in her lap. The sterile smell of disinfectant made her stomach turn. She didn't want to be here, didn't want to see him, but curiosity burned too fiercely to ignore. The door opened, and a nurse gestured. "Mr. Langford will see you now, will you?" Mara followed her inside, clutching the strap of her purse like a lifeline. When she saw him, pale, older, but still radiating that quiet authority, her throat went dry. "Mr. Langford," she said stiffly. "You wanted to see me?" He studied her face for a long, unbearable moment. "Yes," he said softly. "Sit, please." She didn't. "Why am I here? If this is about the restaurant—" "It's not," he interrupted. "This is personal." Her brows knit. "Personal?" Richard exhaled. "The stew you made, that recipe, it wasn't random. I know that flavor. Every spice, every note." Mara folded her arms. "Congratulations, you've got a good palate." He ignored the sarcasm. "It's not that simple. I knew the woman who created that recipe." She blinked. "My mom?" "Yes." The air in the room changed. Mara's voice lowered. "You knew her?" He nodded slowly, guilt shadowing his expression. "Helen Ward. That was her name when I met her. She worked for my family. Before she disappeared." Mara's knees felt weak. She sank into the chair beside him. "Wait. Disappeared?" Richard hesitated. "She left suddenly. I never found out where she went. I tried." "She said she was fired," Mara said sharply. "Said she did something that embarrassed her boss." He shook his head. "That's not true. She left me. I didn't fire her." Her heart thudded. "Why would she leave you?" He looked away. "Because I was a coward. I married someone else." Mara stared at him, speechless. "You're telling me my mom worked for you, and you were—" "What? Her boss? Her lover?" He flinched at the word. "I loved her," he said simply. "But I chose power over her, and I've regretted it every day since." Silence filled the room, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the monitor. Mara swallowed hard. "You said she disappeared. Did you ever try to find her?" He nodded. "I did. Too late." Her chest tightened. "You're lying." "I'm not." His voice cracked. "When I saw you, I thought my mind was playing tricks. But when you said her name, Helen Collins, it felt like the universe was giving me one last chance." Mara's breath caught. "Collins? You knew her as Ward, so you never knew that she had a daughter." He looked at her now with eyes full of something raw and broken. "How old are you, Mara?" 26. He leaned back, tears welling. "Then I left more behind than I ever knew." She stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. Don't do that. Don't pretend you're part of my story." He whispered, "But I might be." Her voice trembled. "What are you saying?" He looked straight at her, guilt carving lines deep into his face. "Mara, I think I'm your father." The room went silent. The heart monitor beeped louder. And just like that, the past wasn't a memory anymore. It was sitting between them, alive and undeniable. By morning, the story was everywhere. Billionaire Richard Langford collapses in restaurant. Unknown waitress, reportedly, at the scene. Sources say he whispered a woman's name before fainting. Headlines burned across every business channel, and speculation spread like wildfire. In the digital age, secrets had a shelf life of minutes. Someone had filmed the scene in Aurum, Richard falling, Mara kneeling beside him, shouting for help. The clip went viral overnight. At first, people only talked about the scandal of power and mortality. Then they noticed her, the young waitress with the trembling hands and terrified eyes. By noon, reporters were parked outside her apartment building, shouting questions through megaphones. "Mara, are you having an affair with Mr. Langford? Did he collapse because of something you gave him? Are you the mystery woman from his past?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Inside, her mother's voice quivered through the apartment. "Mara, please don't open the door. They'll twist everything." "I didn't do anything wrong, Mum," she whispered, "but they make it sound like I did." The landlord knocked later that day, scowling. "You're bringing trouble here. Cameras all over the sidewalk. My tenants don't like it." She nodded, swallowing her pride. "I'll figure something out." Across town, Richard's team scrambled to contain the fallout. His assistant Grace stood before a room full of lawyers and PR strategists, trying to calm them down. "Mr. Langford is recovering. The media frenzy will die down," she said. A board member slammed his hand on the table. "Not if people start connecting the dots. Who's the girl? Why was he with her? Investors are nervous." "Then we stay quiet," Grace said firmly. "No statements, no interviews. Not until he's ready." But silence in the modern world is gasoline on a fire. By evening, #Langford affair was trending worldwide. Every photo of Mara, her name tag, her apartment, even her mother's hospital file, had been dredged up by tabloids. Mara sat on the couch, watching her life unravel on the TV screen. "They're saying I poisoned him," she murmured, "that I wanted money." Helen took her hand. "You can't let them break you, sweetheart. The truth will come out." But Mara wasn't sure she wanted it to. The truth meant facing what Richard had said in that hospital room. "I think I'm your father." She hadn't told her mother about that part. Not yet. The words echoed in her head like a drumbeat she couldn't silence. The next morning, a letter arrived in an unmarked envelope. No sender. Just her name, written in elegant, slanted handwriting. Inside was a single line. "Meet me at Pier 41 tonight. He owes you the truth." Her heart pounded. The paper smelled faintly of old perfume, familiar somehow, like the scent of her mother's wedding dress box. She stared at the letter for a long time, torn between fear and the ache of unanswered questions. When Helen saw it, her face went pale. "Mara, you can't go. Whoever sent that, I have to," Mara said quietly. "If what he told me is true, then I need proof." Helen tried to stand, but winced in pain. "Please, don't dig into that past. It's full of things that can still hurt you." Mara tucked the letter into her jacket pocket. "It's already hurting me, Mum." That night, the city glimmered with cold rain. Reporters still swarmed around Langford's estate, cameras flashing through the darkness. But at the quiet end of the pier, away from the noise, Mara waited. Her reflection shimmered on the wet wood. Footsteps echoed behind her, slow, deliberate. She turned, breath catching. A woman stood there, grey hair under a wide hat, her coat drawn tight. "You don't know me," the woman said softly, "but I knew your mother. And I know the truth about Richard Langford." Lightning flashed, and for the first time, Mara realized this meeting would change everything. Rain misted off the Hudson as the waves slapped against the pier. The city skyline glittered across the water, its lights trembling like distant fire. Mara stood beneath a flickering lamppost, her breath visible in the cold air. The woman before her moved slowly, leaning on a cane, but there was strength in the way she held herself. "I'm Grace Ellison," the woman said. "I used to work for Richard Langford, personal secretary. I handled everything that mattered, and a lot that shouldn't have. Mara's heart pounded. You're the one who sent the letter. Grace nodded. I had to. You deserve to know what really happened. I already know, Mara said bitterly. He said he loved my mother, then married someone richer. Typical story. Grace's eyes softened. It's not that simple. Isn't it? The older woman hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Your mother didn't just work for him. She changed him. He was young, arrogant, reckless. She kept him human. But when his father died, the Langford board demanded he marry Evelyn Grant to save the family business. It wasn't his choice. Mara scoffed. There's always a choice. Yes, Grace agreed quietly. And he made the wrong one. Helen left without telling him she was pregnant. She wanted to protect you. The wind whipped across the pier, tugging at Mara's coat. Protect me from what? From him? From that world, Grace said. The tabloids, the shareholders, the people who would have called you a scandal instead of a child. Helen was proud, but she was also scared. She didn't want your life to be decided by his mistakes. Mara shook her head, her voice cracking. You expect me to feel sorry for him? He had everything. We had nothing. Grace reached into her bag and pulled out a worn envelope, its edges yellowed with age. Before she disappeared, Helen sent me this. She made me promise to give it to you if the truth ever came out. Mara hesitated, then took it. Inside was a photo. Her mother in her 20s, smiling, a hand resting over a barely there baby bump. Next to her stood a young Richard Langford, his arm around her, his expression open and warm. Behind them was a handwritten note in blue ink, for the life we couldn't have, for the love that never left. Mara stared at it, the words blurring as tears filled her eyes. She never told me. Grace nodded. She didn't want you to grow up hating him. She wanted you to be free of his name. Silence hung between them, filled only by the rhythmic slap of waves. Finally, Mara whispered, Why tell me now? Grace sighed. Because he's dying, Mara. His heart's failing, and for the first time in decades, he's trying to make things right. Mara's jaw tightened. You think showing up in my life fixes 26 years of abandonment? No, Grace said softly. But maybe it gives you a chance to decide what forgiveness means. Mara looked out over the dark water. The city lights shimmered like tiny lies, beautiful and untrustworthy. I don't know if I can face him again, she murmured. Grace placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Maybe you don't have to forgive him. Maybe just knowing the truth is enough. As Grace walked away, Mara stood alone on the pier, the letter crumpled in her hand, her heart split between rage and something she didn't want to name. She pulled out her phone. The screen reflected her tear-streaked face. One unread message blinked on the screen. From Richard Langford. Please, I need to see you. Her thumb hovered over the reply button, and for the first time, she didn't know whether to walk toward the truth or run from it forever. 2 days passed before Mara answered his message. Each time her phone buzzed, she'd stare at it until the screen dimmed again. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. Don't dig into the past. It'll hurt you. But the truth was already under her skin, burning. When she finally went, the Langford estate felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum. Marble floors, silent hallways, paintings of men who'd never smiled. Every sound seemed swallowed by money. Grace met her at the door, looking weary. He's in the study. It's not a good day. Then why does he want to see me? Mara asked. Grace hesitated. Because he knows he's running out of good days. Mara followed her down a long hallway lined with portraits of the Langford family, generations of men in tailored suits, cold eyes staring down from gilded frames. At the very end, the door was open. Richard sat by the window, thin under a heavy blanket, staring out at the grey afternoon. When she entered, he smiled faintly. "You came." "I'm not sure why," she admitted. He nodded. "That makes two of us." For a moment, they said nothing. The air between them was thick with things unsaid. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet, frayed around the edges. "They call it heart failure. I call it justice catching up." Mara crossed her arms. "You shouldn't joke about that." "I'm not." He gestured toward a leather box on the table. "I wanted to show you something." Inside were photographs, old, creased, edges curling with time. Richard and Helen at a lake, Helen laughing in a kitchen, Helen holding a newborn baby. Mara's breath caught. "That's me." "Yes," he said softly. "The day she left. She told me she was taking you to see her sister. I never saw either of you again." Her throat tightened. "You could have tried harder." He looked at her with a kind of sadness that had no defense left. "You're right. I thought I had all the time in the world to fix it. Then the years just disappeared." Mara picked up one of the photos, tracing her mother's smile. "She worked herself to death. You don't get to pity yourself." "I'm not asking for pity," he said. "I'm asking for forgiveness." She looked up sharply. "You don't earn that with tears." He nodded slowly. "Then let me earn it another way. I've set up a trust for your mother's medical bills. And for you. You'll never have to worry again." Her anger flared. "You think money fixes this? You think writing a check makes you my father?" He didn't answer. His hand trembled slightly as he poured himself a glass of water. The color drained from his face. Mara softened for half a second. "You should rest." He shook his head. "No, not yet." He looked out the window, his voice breaking. "All my life, I built towers out of gold and marble to bury what I'd lost. But every one of them collapsed from the same thing. Emptiness. And for the first time, Mara saw it. Not the billionaire, but the man beneath the empire, small and human, swallowed by regret." He turned back to her, eyes glassy. "I never stopped loving her, Mara. And now I see her every time I look at you." Mara swallowed the lump in her throat. "You should have told her that when it mattered." A long silence hung between them. Then Richard smiled weakly. "Maybe I'm telling her now." Outside, thunder rolled over the city. The house creaked under the weight of the storm, as if even the walls were listening. And somewhere deep inside her chest, the part of Mara that had always hated him began to crack, just enough to let the truth in. That night, the rain hadn't stopped. It beat against the hospital windows like an impatient hand, steady and relentless. Mara sat by her mother's bedside, her thoughts scattered between exhaustion and disbelief. The hum of the machines filled the silence, each beep a quiet reminder of time slipping away. Helen looked frail, her skin pale beneath the fluorescent lights. She smiled when she saw her daughter walk in. "You look tired," she whispered. "I'm fine," Mara said softly, setting a paper cup of coffee on the nightstand. "You should rest." Helen shook her head weakly. "No. Sit with me." Mara hesitated, then sat, her heart heavy with the conversation she'd had earlier that day. She'd seen the photographs, heard his words. I never stopped loving her. And now those words were an anchor, dragging her into a truth she wasn't ready to face. She opened her bag, pulling out the newspaper she'd grabbed that morning. Across the front page, a headline screamed, "Langford Legacy in Crisis. Billionaire's Collapse Sparks Questions." Below it, a smaller picture of Richard, looking fragile, and a one of her, a blurry photo of her outside the hospital. Helen's eyes widened. "Oh, Mara." "It's everywhere," Mara said quietly. "They think I'm some gold digger trying to take advantage of him." Her mother looked at her for a long moment. "And what did he say to you?" Mara's fingers clenched around the paper. "He said he knew you, that he loved you, that he might be my father." The words hung in the air like broken glass. Helen's breath hitched. For a moment, she said nothing, her eyes distant, as if she were staring into the past. Then tears welled, soft and silent. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she whispered. Mara froze. "So it's true?" Helen nodded, her hand trembling as she reached for her daughter's. "Yes, sweetheart. He's your father." Mara's world tilted. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I wanted to protect you," Helen said, her voice cracking. "He belonged to a world that destroys people like us. When I found out I was pregnant, I went to tell him, but he was already married. They would have buried us both just to keep their reputation clean. So I left. I changed my name. I built a new life." Mara pulled her hand away, shaking her head. "A new life? We were poor. You worked yourself to death for people who didn't care if you existed." Helen's eyes filled with pain. "But you existed. That's what mattered. I couldn't give you luxury, but I could give you love. And I never wanted you to grow up thinking you were someone's mistake." Mara stood, pacing. "The room felt too small, too bright, too loud. You should have told me the truth, Mum. I spent my whole life wondering why we never had enough, why you cried at night, and it was because of him." Helen's voice softened. "It wasn't his fault alone. I made choices, too, and I'd make them again if it meant keeping you safe." Mara turned away, blinking back tears. "Safe from what, Mum? From a man who actually wants to know me now?" Helen closed her eyes, her breathing shallow. "Be careful, Mara. Guilt can look a lot like love when it's too late to fix anything." The monitor beeped steadily. Mara sat again, burying her face in her hands. "I don't know what to do." Her mother smiled faintly, her hand finding Mara's again. "Just promise me one thing." "What?" "Don't let anger decide who you are. It already ruined one life. Don't let it take yours, too." A tear slipped down Mara's cheek. She whispered, "I promise." Helen closed her eyes, her voice barely audible. "Good. Then maybe I can finally rest." And as the rain softened outside, Mara realized the truth had freed her, but it had also broken the only person she'd ever wanted to protect. The funeral was small, quiet, and heavy with unspoken things. No press, no cameras, just the sound of rain against umbrellas and the hollow thud of dirt on a coffin. Mara stood motionless, her black dress soaked through, her hands trembling around a single white rose. When the priest finished, she whispered, "Goodbye, Mum," and placed the flower on the polished wood. Her lips quivered as she added, "You kept me safe, even from the truth." Afterward, she walked home alone. The world felt wrong, too loud, too busy, too alive for what she'd just lost. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it. Then again, and again. Finally, she pulled it out. Unknown number. "Miss Collins," a calm male voice said. "This is Dr. Harris from Langford Medical. Mr. Langford has requested a DNA test. We'd like your consent." She stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, rain pooling at her feet. "You want me to prove what my mother already told me?" "It's a legal matter," the doctor explained. "For his estate." Mara's grip tightened on the phone. "Estate? He's not dead yet." "Not yet," the voice said softly. "But he's preparing." She ended the call without answering, her chest tight. It felt cruel. Scientific proof for something that already hurt enough. But a week later, she found herself sitting in a sterile lab room, staring at a swab in a plastic bag. The nurse smiled gently. "This will only take a minute." Mara nodded, her voice small. "Let's just get it over with." 2 weeks passed. She tried to bury herself in work, but the restaurant had fired her after the scandal. Nobody wanted the viral waitress. Every job interview ended the same way. polite smiles, quick rejections. People loved a sad story until it walked into their office. Then one morning, a thick envelope arrived in her mailbox. She didn't need to open it to know what it was. Still, her hands shook as she tore it open. DNA result, 99.9%. Probability of paternity, Richard Langford. The room spun. She sank onto the couch, the paper trembling between her fingers. It was true. She wasn't just the waitress he mocked. She was his blood. Her phone buzzed again. Grace. "Mara," Grace said softly. "He wants to see you." Mara laughed bitterly. "Of course he does. He finally has proof. I'm his new redemption project." Grace hesitated. "He's not trying to buy forgiveness, Mara. He's trying to leave something right behind." "I don't want his money," Mara snapped. "I wanted my mother back. But it's too late for that." There was silence on the other end. Then Grace said quietly, "He's dying, Mara. You don't have to forgive him, but don't let him die thinking you hated him." When the call ended, Mara stared at the test result again. The black letters blurred through her tears. 99.9%. That number didn't feel like truth. It felt like punishment. She thought of her mother's words. Don't let anger decide who you are. By the time she reached the Langford estate again, the sky had turned a bruised purple. Grace met her at the door, relief washing over her face. "He's weaker than before. He'll be glad you came." "I didn't come to forgive him," Mara said quietly. "I came to say what he needs to hear." Grace nodded, stepping aside. "Then say it. But hurry." As Mara walked through the hall, the same portraits loomed above her. Cold men, rich ghosts. But this time, she wasn't intimidated. She was one of them, whether she wanted it or not. In the dim light of the study, Richard sat hunched in his chair, oxygen tube resting under his nose. He looked smaller than she remembered, almost fragile. "Mara," he whispered when he saw her. She didn't smile. "We got the results." He nodded slowly. "I know." "You were right," she said. "You are my father. But that doesn't make you my family." His eyes glistened. "Then let me at least die knowing you're not alone." Her jaw tightened, her voice breaking. "You left us alone for 26 years. He lowered his head, tears slipping down his cheeks. "Then let me spend what's left of my life trying to change that." And though Mara said nothing, she stayed, not out of forgiveness, but because somewhere deep inside, she finally wanted to see the man her mother once loved. The rain returned the night Mara agreed to see him again, the kind of relentless storm that turned the city into a blur of reflections and regret. Grace had called that morning, saying Richard had insisted on preparing a private dinner at the estate. "He said it's not about money," Grace told her. "He wants to share a meal. One last thing he can give." Mara hesitated all day, pacing her apartment, staring at the empty chair across from her. Her mother's voice still whispered in her memory. "Be careful. Guilt can look a lot like love." But something inside her needed to know. When she arrived that evening, the house looked different. The lights were softer. The grand dining room, usually sterile and intimidating, was now warm, almost human. The smell hit her first. Rosemary, garlic, slow-simmered vegetables. It was the smell of her childhood. She stopped at the doorway. "That's my mother's stew." Richard looked up from the head of the table. He was thinner now, his face pale but calm. The oxygen tube was gone. He sat straight, proud in his frailty. "Your mother's recipe," he said. "I remembered it." Mara's voice trembled. "Why?" He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Because food tells the truth better than people do." "Sit. Please." She hesitated, then slowly took her seat. The table was simple, no silver platters, no champagne, just 2 bowls of steaming stew and a single candle between them. For a long time they didn't speak. The rain outside softened to a rhythm, steady as breath. Finally, Richard said quietly, I don't deserve this moment. You're right, she said. He smiled sadly. I know. But I wanted it anyway. She stared into her bowl. You really remembered how to make it? I wrote down everything she ever told me, he said. Her handwriting's still on my recipe cards. I've read those notes more times than I can count. You kept them? He nodded. They were all I had left of her, until now. Her chest tightened. You think cooking this makes up for what you did? No, he said softly. It reminds me why I did it. I wanted to be someone who could give her the world. Instead, I gave her pain. Mara pushed her spoon aside, her eyes bright with unshed tears. She didn't need the world. She needed you. Richard swallowed hard, his voice breaking. I know. A flash of lightning lit the room. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the faint clink of a spoon as he lifted it to his lips and took a bite. He closed his eyes. It tastes exactly the same, he murmured. God, I can almost hear her laughing. Mara looked down at her own bowl. The smell was intoxicating, comforting and cruel at once. She picked up her spoon, hesitating. When I was little, I used to think she made this stew to feed me. But now I realize she was feeding herself, too. It was all she had left of you. Richard's eyes glistened. I wish I could have told her I never stopped loving her. You can tell me, she whispered. He looked at her then, not with pride, not with pity, but with the ache of a man who had lost everything that mattered. I do love you, Mara. Not because of blood. Because you're the best part of her I ever knew. Her throat tightened. She wanted to stay angry, to guard herself. But something inside her cracked. She lifted her spoon and took a bite. Warmth filled her chest. For the first time, she didn't taste poverty or loss. She tasted her mother's forgiveness. Silent, steady, waiting. Outside, the thunder rolled farther away. The storm was ending. Richard exhaled, tears slipping down his face. Thank you. For coming. Mara looked at him through the candlelight, her voice barely a whisper. You're welcome, Dad. And in that fragile silence, love, the kind they'd both lost, finally found its way home. The candlelight flickered between them, a trembling glow against years of silence. Outside, the storm had finally drifted away, leaving the windows streaked with rain and moonlight. The air smelled of stew and something unspoken. Forgiveness hanging just out of reach. Richard's hand shook slightly as he set his spoon down. You know, he said softly, I've eaten in the finest restaurants on earth, but nothing ever tasted like this. Mara looked at him, her voice tight. That's because this wasn't made for money. It was made for love. He smiled faintly, and I traded love for money. She didn't reply. She was watching him. Not the man the tabloids called a billionaire, but a tired, broken father trying to hold together what was left of a life built on regret. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time, he didn't look powerful. He looked human. He picked up the spoon again. Your mother once told me this stew would outlast both of us. I didn't believe her. Mara's eyes softened. She always said food keeps memories alive. Maybe that's what this is. He looked down at the bowl, then back at her. Do you believe in second chances? I believe in consequences, she said quietly, but sometimes they overlap. He laughed under his breath, a fragile sound. That's fair. For a moment, they ate in silence, each spoonful slower than the last. The candle burned lower, throwing long shadows across the table. When Richard finally spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a confession. I never wanted my life to turn into what it became. I thought success would fix the emptiness, that power would make the guilt disappear. But it only made me colder. Mara studied him. Then why didn't you walk away? He looked up, his eyes tired. Because I didn't know how. I was a coward who called himself a visionary. She didn't know whether to be angry or sad. The man before her had destroyed her mother's heart, yet here he was, asking for something fragile and impossible, a chance to make it right. When she spoke, her voice was gentle. "You can't fix the past, but maybe you can stop running from it." He nodded, tears pooling in his eyes. "I'm not running anymore. I want to build something for you. Something that lasts beyond me. Not an empire, a legacy that means something." Mara frowned. "What kind of legacy?" "A foundation," he said, his voice steadier now. "In your mother's name. For women who gave up everything to raise their children alone. For people like her." Mara blinked, her throat tightening. "You'd do that?" "I already started," he said with a faint smile. "Helen's Heart Foundation. The paperwork's signed. All it needs is you." She covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now. "I don't know what to say." He reached across the table, his trembling hand brushing hers. "Just say you'll keep her memory alive. That's all I need." She looked down at their hands, his skin pale and thin, hers strong but trembling. Slowly, she nodded. "I'll do it. For her." He smiled weakly, relief flooding his face. "Then maybe I can finally rest." Mara squeezed his hand. "Not yet. You're still breathing, aren't you?" He chuckled, a quiet rasp. "Barely." She laughed softly through her tears. For the first time, their laughter sounded the same, weary but real. They finished the stew in silence, the last of the candle melting into a pool of wax. The air felt lighter, almost peaceful. When the clock struck midnight, Richard leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. "You know what this tastes like?" Mara looked up. "What?" "Forgiveness," he whispered. Her voice cracked. "Then finish it." He smiled, took one final spoonful, and whispered, "Your mother was right. It does outlast us." And in that moment, between life and memory, a broken man found peace, and a daughter found her way back to love. The next morning, sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks. But inside the Langford headquarters, the air was colder than ever. The boardroom, with its floor-to-ceiling glass and polished steel, was a battlefield disguised as a meeting. Every executive in the room wore the same look. Polite, corporate concern, masking ruthless ambition. At the head of the table sat Richard Langford, paler than usual, but defiant. His oxygen tank was tucked discreetly behind his chair. Beside him sat Mara, her hair pulled back neatly, a folder in her lap. The first meeting of Helen's Heart Foundation was supposed to be announced that day. But something felt wrong. The atmosphere buzzed with tension. The CFO, a sharp-eyed man named Charles Denton, cleared his throat. "Before we begin, Mr. Langford, the board has concerns." Richard leaned back slowly. "Concerns?" Charles exchanged glances with the others. "Your recent actions, specifically your personal involvement with an employee, Miss Collins, have raised questions about your judgment. Investors are nervous. The press has been relentless." Mara froze, her stomach knotting. Richard's jaw tightened. "She's not an employee anymore, and this discussion is about business, not gossip." Charles's voice remained calm but cutting. "It is business when your personal life jeopardizes billions in shareholder value. You've turned this company into a tabloid headline." Another board member, a woman with diamond earrings and a voice like glass, added, "We've all read the DNA reports. Whether or not it's true, the optics are damaging. Langford Capital can't afford emotional distractions." Richard's hands trembled slightly, but his voice stayed steady. "You think compassion is a distraction?" Charles smirked. "No. Weakness is." Mara shifted forward. "You don't get to talk about him like that." Charles gave her a thin smile. "Miss Collins, this is a corporate matter. You have no authority here." She met his gaze. "Maybe not yet. But if he's gone, I'll have plenty." A ripple of discomfort went through the room. Richard gave a faint, proud smile. "That's my daughter," he said softly. Charles's expression hardened. "Then let's make something clear. The board is voting today. We're initiating a motion to remove you, Mr. Langford, on grounds of medical incapacity and reputational damage. The room erupted into murmurs. Richard's face drained of color. You're staging a coup. Charles didn't deny it. We're protecting the company. Mara stood, her voice sharp. You're protecting your paychecks. Richard raised a trembling hand, signaling her to sit. It's all right, he said quietly. They've been waiting for this moment. Charles slid a document across the table. Sign the resignation, Richard. Step down gracefully. Keep what dignity you have left. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the faint hiss of the oxygen. Then slowly, Richard reached for the pen. Mara's voice broke through the silence. Don't do it. You built this company. He looked at her, eyes filled with both pride and weariness. I built it out of guilt. Maybe it's time to let go. He signed, one stroke at a time. When he was done, he slid the paper back to Charles and said, Congratulations, you just won your war. Charles smiled coldly. Thank you, Richard. We'll take it from here. Richard stood shakily, leaning on the table for balance. You can take my name off the building, he said, but you can't erase what it stands for. He turned to Mara. Come on, sweetheart. We're done here. As they left the boardroom, whispers followed. Judgmental, cruel, envious. But Mara didn't care. She reached out and took his arm to steady him. Outside the glass doors, the hallway was quiet. Richard paused to catch his breath. They think they took everything from me, he said softly. Mara looked up at him. They're wrong. He smiled faintly. Yeah, they can't take you. And for the first time in his life, Richard Langford walked away from power, not as a man defeated, but as a father finally free. By the next morning, every financial network in the country had the same breaking story. Richard Langford removed as CEO, daughter of former housekeeper named in family scandal. The photos were everywhere. Richard, frail but standing tall beside Mara, Charles Denton shaking hands with reporters, and the headline that stung the most, Langford dynasty falls to illegitimate heir. Mara sat on the edge of her bed, the TV light flickering across her face. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. News outlets, strangers, threats, offers. Half the world wanted to see her fail. The other half wanted to buy her story. Grace called from the estate, her voice weary. You need to stay off social media, Mara. It's bad out there. I can't hide forever, she said. They've already decided who I am. They don't know you, Grace replied gently. But he does, and that's what matters. When the call ended, Mara stood by the window, watching the morning rain. The city moved below her, as if nothing had happened. But inside her, everything had changed. Later that day, she walked into the hospital where Richard had been moved for observation. Reporters swarmed outside the entrance, shouting questions. Mara, are you taking over Langford Capital? Are you planning to sue the board? Is your relationship with Richard Langford romantic or paternal? She didn't respond. Her jaw was tight as she pushed through the crowd. The cameras flashed like lightning. When she entered his room, the noise disappeared. Richard was sitting up, reading the same headline she had seen. The paper trembled slightly in his hands. You saw it? She asked quietly. He looked up, smiling faintly. Hard to miss. I always said my life would end up on the front page. This isn't funny, she said. They're tearing you apart. He set the paper down. Let them. I've spent my whole life being a headline. Maybe it's time I became a lesson instead. Mara's eyes softened. They're calling me illegitimate. His voice hardened. Don't ever let that word touch you. You're not defined by the mistakes that made you. You're defined by what you do with the truth. She wanted to believe that, but it was hard. Outside the hospital, protesters had gathered. Shareholders, former employees, angry voices chanting about corruption and betrayal. By evening, it got worse. Richard's ex-wife, Evelyn Grant Langford, appeared on national television. Perfect makeup, measured tone, poison in every word. "I wish Mr. Langford peace," she told the reporter, her smile thin. "But I do not recognize this young woman as part of our family. Some people will do anything for a name." Mara watched from the waiting room, fists clenched. When the segment ended, she whispered, "She hates me." Richard chuckled weakly. "Evelyn hates anyone who reminds her I once loved someone else. She said I ruined everything." He turned to her, eyes steady. "No, Mara, you saved me. The rest of it, the money, the company, none of that matters." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then his breathing hitched. The monitor beeped faster. "Dad?" she said, panic rising. He waved her off, forcing a smile. "I'm okay. Just tired." "Then rest," she said softly. He closed his eyes, the tension easing from his face. "You know, when I was your age, I thought legacy meant power. Now I know it's just memory." Mara sat beside him, holding his hand. "Then we'll make sure you're remembered for more than money." He smiled faintly. "Then I can go in peace." But before peace could come, the door opened. A familiar, cold voice filled the room. "How touching." Mara turned. Evelyn stood in the doorway, immaculate and icy. "You may have fooled the press, darling," she said, eyes locked on Mara, "but you'll never be a Langford." And for the first time, Mara realized the real fight for her mother's legacy had just begun. Evelyn Langford didn't enter rooms. She conquered them. Her heels clicked against the tile as she walked toward the hospital bed, every step deliberate, every glance sharpened like glass. Mara instinctively moved closer to her father. Richard's voice was calm but weary. "Evelyn, this isn't the time." "On the contrary," she replied smoothly. "It's exactly the time. You've embarrassed this family enough, and now you're letting her carry your name." She turned her gaze on Mara, her smile cold. "The waitress who brought down an empire." Mara clenched her fists. "I didn't destroy anything. You and your greed did." Evelyn laughed, low and sharp. "How charming. You sound just like your mother. All fire and no foresight. Let me tell you something, dear. Passion doesn't pay the bills. Power does. And you'll never have it." Richard's hand trembled on the blanket. "Enough, Evelyn." "No, Richard," she said, her voice rising. "You don't get to throw away decades of work for some sentimental redemption story. You're sick, and the board needs a stable face. The lawyers will ensure she gets nothing." Mara's chest tightened. "You're threatening him now?" Evelyn turned her icy gaze back to her. "I'm protecting what's mine." "Mom's name isn't yours to protect," Mara shot back. Evelyn smirked. "Oh, sweetheart, you really think a foundation named after your mother scares me? You're a publicity stunt. When he's gone, the money, the company, the estate, all of it, reverts to the Langford Trust, and you'll go back to wherever people like you belong." Mara felt the heat rise in her chest, anger mixing with disbelief. "People like me?" "Waitresses," Evelyn said, almost whispering. "Housekeepers. Mistakes." Before Mara could speak, Richard pushed himself upright, his voice trembling but fierce. "Evelyn, get out!" She blinked, startled. "Richard, I said get out!" His voice boomed through the room, strong despite his failing heart. "You spent years turning this name into a weapon. Helen gave it meaning. Mara gives it life." For a moment, Evelyn's mask cracked, the faintest flicker of humiliation crossing her face. Then she straightened, icy composure returning. "You'll regret this." "I already have," he said. She turned sharply and left, her perfume lingering like poison in the air. When the door closed, Mara looked at him. "She's not going to stop, is she?" Richard shook his head. "She never does. But she can't take away what really matters." Mara swallowed hard. "She can still fight the will." He nodded weakly. "Then let her. You'll fight harder." Later that night, the hospital was quiet. Richard slept, and Mara sat by his bedside, scrolling through messages on her phone. Hundreds of strangers had written to her. Waitresses, single mothers, people who said her story gave them hope. She hadn't realized until then that her pain had a voice, and people were listening. The next morning, Mara called Grace. "I'm done hiding," she said. "If Evelyn wants a war, she'll get one, but not with lawyers. With the truth." Grace hesitated. "What do you mean?" "I'm going public. Not about money, not about inheritance, about Mom. About what she gave up, what he's trying to make right. People should know who Helen really was." That afternoon, Mara announced a press conference. Cameras, microphones, lights. The very things she once feared now stood waiting. As she stepped onto the stage, the noise of reporters faded. She looked straight into the cameras, her voice calm, steady. "My name is Mara Collins," she began. "I'm not here to talk about scandals or companies. I'm here to talk about a woman who taught me that love and dignity are worth more than gold. Her name was Helen, and she was never a mistake." Back at the hospital, Richard watched the broadcast from his bed, tears glinting in his eyes. "She's more her mother than I ever deserved," he whispered. And while Evelyn plotted in silence, the world began to see Mara, not as a scandal, but as a legacy reborn. The days that followed felt like the world had slowed down. The chaos of the press, the lawsuits, the shouting matches on TV. It all faded into a quiet rhythm of beeping monitors and whispered prayers. The hospital room became its own small universe, where time was measured not by clocks, but by Richard's breaths. Mara never left his side. She brought her laptop to the hospital and began drafting plans for the Helen's Heart Foundation. She worked through the night, writing proposals, reaching out to sponsors, building something that could outlive both of them. Richard watched her from his bed, his eyes soft. "You look just like her when you focus," he said one morning, his voice barely above a whisper. Mara smiled faintly. "She used to say that about me." He chuckled weakly. Then she was right about everything. Outside, the world had turned grey with winter. Snow lined the edges of the windows, catching light like glass dust. Every day, fewer visitors came. Grace stopped by once with papers from the lawyers, but Richard waved them away. "Not now," he said. "No more signatures, no more numbers. I've already decided." That night, Mara found him writing something on a yellow notepad, his handwriting slow and deliberate. When she tried to peek, he smiled. "Not yet. You'll know when it's time." The next morning, she came back with coffee, humming to herself. The room was quiet. Too quiet. She froze in the doorway. The monitors were still. For a moment, the world went silent, and her body refused to move. Then her breath caught, and the cup slipped from her hand, crashing to the floor. "Dad?" she whispered. No answer. The nurses rushed in, their voices soft but urgent. "Miss Collins, please step outside." She shook her head, tears blurring her vision. "No, I'm not leaving him." They moved gently around her, checking vitals, confirming what her heart already knew. After a long moment, one of them nodded to another. "Time of death, 6:47 a.m. Mara sank into the chair beside his bed, clutching his hand. Still warm. "You promised we'd finish the foundation together," she whispered. "You don't get to leave me now." Grace entered quietly a few hours later, eyes red but composed. "He made me promise to give you this." She handed Mara a sealed envelope with her name written in his familiar, uneven script. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single-page letter, written in blue ink. "My dearest Mara, if you're reading this, I've already gone to find your mother. Tell her I kept my promise, that I found our daughter, and she's every bit the light we hoped she'd be. I'm not leaving you with money, though there will be enough to build what matters. I'm leaving you with her dream, your dream now. The world forgot Helen Ward, but you'll make sure they remember her as the woman who fed souls, not just stomachs. Forgive me for the years I wasn't there." I can't change the past, but I can give you a future filled with meaning instead of regret. You are my greatest success. Love always, Dad. The ink was smudged near the end, as if he'd paused mid-sentence to wipe a tear. Mara pressed the letter to her heart, sobbing silently. Later that evening, she stood outside the hospital, the snow falling gently around her. She looked up at the sky, the kind of soft grey her mother used to call forgiving weather. You found her, she whispered, and now you're both free. Grace joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. He left the entire foundation to you. It's yours now. Mara nodded, her breath visible in the cold air. No, she said softly. It's theirs. I'm just keeping it alive. And as the snow fell heavier, the grief in her chest shifted, not disappearing, but transforming into something that finally felt like peace. Spring came quietly that year, soft and unhurried. The snow melted from the rooftops, the air smelled of wet earth and new beginnings, and the world seemed to move a little slower, as if giving space for healing to catch up. 3 months had passed since Richard's funeral. The estate was quiet now, most of the servants gone, the lawyers finished. What remained wasn't money or marble. It was something smaller, warmer. At the edge of the city, in a renovated corner cafe, once owned by the Langford Foundation, a new sign hung over the door. Harvest Heart. The walls were painted a gentle cream, the kind her mother loved, and every table had carried a small vase of daisies. The scent of fresh bread and rosemary filled the air. On one wall, framed photos told a story. A woman with auburn hair laughing in a kitchen, a young man holding a child, and at the center, a simple plaque. In memory of Helen Ward and Richard Langford, proof that love outlasts regret. Mara stood behind the counter, tying her apron as the first customers of the day came in. They weren't the rich or the powerful. They were nurses from the nearby hospital, construction workers, teachers, ordinary people. The kind her mother used to serve without judgment. A little boy ran to the counter, wide-eyed. Miss, my grandma says you make the best stew in New York. Mara laughed softly. Does she now? Well, tell her she has good taste. She ladled a bowl of the famous harvest stew, her mother's recipe unchanged. When she set it down, the aroma filled the cafe, rich and comforting. Grace entered a few minutes later, older now but still carrying that air of quiet strength. She smiled at the sight. You did it, she said. You made it real. Mara wiped her hands on her apron. It wasn't just me. They both left something worth building. Grace glanced at the photo wall. The foundation's doing well. The shelter in Brooklyn opened last week. The women there, they talk about you like you're a miracle worker. Mara shook her head. I'm just finishing what Mom started. She used to say love has to be cooked into something you can share. Grace smiled. Looks like you've shared plenty. Outside, a soft rain began to fall, tapping gently against the windows. Mara moved to the door and turned the sign from closed to open. A reporter standing nearby lifted a camera. Miss Collins, or should I say Miss Langford, could we get a photo? Mara paused for a moment, then smiled. Just Mara, she said. That's enough. The flash went off, capturing her standing beneath the cafe's sign, apron dusted with flour, eyes bright but calm. Later that evening, after closing time, she sat alone at one of the tables. The lights were low, the city quiet outside. She poured 2 bowls of stew, one across from her, one for herself. To you, Mum, she whispered, looking at the empty chair. And to you, Dad, I hope you're both proud. For a long time, she didn't eat. She just let the smell fill the room, warm and familiar. Then she took a single bite, smiling through her tears. The taste was exactly as she remembered. The same stew her mother had made in a cramped kitchen. The same flavor that had stopped a billionaire's heart. The same recipe that had tied 3 lives together across decades. The bell above the door jingled once, stirred by the wind. Mara looked up, smiling faintly. Welcome home, she whispered to the air. Outside, the rain turned to sunlight, breaking through the clouds, and in that light, surrounded by the scent of rosemary and memory, Mara finally understood. Forgiveness wasn't forgetting. It was carrying love forward, one bowl at a time.